Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming here today to this ceremony where we are recognizing National Crime Victims' Rights Week. It is a extremely important week where all over the country we take the opportunity to pause and reflect on the necessity for the protection of victims' rights throughout the criminal justice system. It is an important event that I'm very honored to have some very great dignitaries here today in respect of victims' rights that I just want to recognize briefly. We have our Attorney General, Jason Miyares, with us here today. We also have our Mayor Bobby Dyer, our Police Chief Paul Newdigate, and our Undersheriff Brian Staziri. I also want to recognize a few people who have dedicated their lives to fighting for victims' rights. And I'm not sure they're all here, but I'm going to say them just in case they are and I don't see them. But Robin Gauthier from Samaritan House, she's the director of Samaritan House, that is the great victim shelter here in Virginia Beach. We also have Kristen Pine from YWCA, as well as Michelle Young from YWCA, and Larissa Sutherland from the Navy Family Advocacy Program. So at this time, I'd like to call on Mayor Bobby Dyer, who is going to present a resolution.
Thank you, and isn't today a glorious day to be right here in Virginia Beach? But let me say, before I read my remarks, we are considered the safest city in the country. It takes a lot of work to do that. But in spite of that, crime happens, and there are victims. And we can never forget the human capital that we as a government, but as a society, are compelled to confront and be with. A crime can happen in 1 second, but the memories may live in perpetuity for the rest of the life of many of the people involved. So by taking the time to recognize the importance and significance of the job that we do as a city, that our police do, and it's a team effort between police, Commonwealth attorney, all the way down to the 911 people, the sheriff's office, but also the people in the community are also first responders, going forward. So it really does take a united city, not only to help prevent crime, but also once it happens, that we can step forward and help those that need it. With that said, I am pleased to read this proclamation. Whereas the term victim is more than just a label and has legal standing and protections that go along with it. And whereas Crime Victims' Rights Act passed here in Virginia and at the federal level guarantee victims the right to meaningful participation in the criminal justice process. And whereas victim service providers, advocates, law enforcement officers, attorneys, and other allied professionals can help survivors find their justice by enforcing these rights. And whereas equity and inclusion are fundamental prerequisites to survivor care and survivor-led services that provide victims with opportunities to share their experiences are essential to blueprints for support. And whereas National Crime Victims' Rights Week provides an opportunity to recommit ensuring that accessible, appropriate, and trauma-informed services are offered to all victims of crime. And whereas the City of Virginia Beach is hereby dedicated to helping crime survivors find their justice by enforcing victims' rights, expanding access to services, and ensuring equity and inclusion for all. Therefore, I, Robert M. Bobby Dyer, Mayor of the City of Virginia Beach, do hereby proclaim April 24th to 30th, 2022, Crime Victims' Rights Week in Virginia Beach, and I affirm this city's commitment to creating a victim service and a criminal justice response that assists all victims of crime during Crime Victims' Rights Week and throughout the year, and expressing our sincere gratitude and appreciation for those community members, victim service providers, and criminal justice professionals who are committed and on improving our response to all victims of crime so that they may find relevance, assistance, support, justice, and peace. In witness thereof, I hereunto set my hand caused by the official seal of the City of Virginia Beach to be affixed on this 28th day of April, 2022. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Mayor. So I do want to take a second, and I recognize before some people had dedicated their lives to fighting for victims' rights. I have in my office a division that specifically does that every single day, my victim witness office. And I'd like for all those people here from my victim witness office to stand for a second or raise your hand, whatever you want to do. Thank you all very much for what you do for victims day in and day out. You know, prosecutors have many different roles that they perform on a daily basis. As law enforcement officers, obviously, community safety is one of the big ones. It's one of the priorities. But in addition to that, we are there to protect individual rights, including those of defendants. We're there to protect the rule of law. But one of our most sacred roles is to protect the innocent. And who could be more innocent than victims of crime who have been preyed upon by those who would hurt them physically, financially, mentally. These victims turn to a criminal justice system in seek of justice. And what do they find? They find a system that oftentimes is intimidating, that oftentimes is confusing, that oftentimes seems cold. Which is why it's so important that we have such great victim advocacy groups, as we've recognized before, including our victim witness program, so that we can ensure that victims are treated with dignity and respect as they go through the criminal justice system. It's why we fought so hard years ago to get the Victims' Bill of Rights into the Code of Virginia so that we could codify protections for victims in the criminal justice system. It was a way of recognizing that we hold these beliefs dear, that it is important to us that victims are treated with dignity and respect. However, over the last few years, it seems that some people have lost their way, have lost sight of the importance of victims' rights, and their focus has been drawn elsewhere. We have, over the last few years, seen laws and policies enacted that focus more on the guilty, that preyed on victims, rather than the victims themselves. We see laws changed in the name of criminal justice reform, and yet victims are not even given a seat at the table to let their views be known as what the criminal justice system should look like. When we have a scenario like that, we have lost our way. We have lost sight of victims' rights. Nothing exemplifies that problem more than the actions of the Virginia Parole Board over the last few years. We have seen defendants, inmates released from custody, and victims not only not having a say in the matter, not even getting notified that this was taking place, in a complete miscarriage of justice. It was a story that we heard over and over and over all around Virginia and right here in Virginia Beach. When it first came to our attention in this office that this is the practice that was in place, I assigned an investigator, and every time we received a notice from the parole board, our investigator would go and contact the victims to ensure that they received notice of what was taking place. And again, we heard over and over again, we were never notified. We were never told. That is losing sight of the criminal justices and our community's responsibility to victims' rights, to ensuring that they have the simple, basic decency they deserve, with respect throughout the process, to have a voice in what's going on, and we were clearly failing in that on a state level. I applaud Governor Youngkin and General Miyares. They moved swiftly when they took office to wipe the slate clean on the parole board, to bring a new parole board with new policies that will ensure that victims have a voice in the process moving forward, to ensure that they're treated with the dignity and the respect that they deserve throughout the process every single time. And that is what victims deserve. That is what we as a community should expect. And I hope that we as a community will take this week, National Crime Victims' Rights Week, to dedicate ourselves to ensuring that we fight for victims' rights every day. I know that that is something that Attorney General Miyares holds very dear, because as a former prosecutor here in Virginia Beach, I got to work closely with him. And I know that he saw every day the struggles that victims go through in the criminal justice system. And we are very fortunate to have him in Richmond fighting for victims' rights for us. And we're very fortunate to have him with us here today. And so, without further ado, Attorney General Jason Miyares.
It is great to be here back home. It's a little bit of a circle of life moment for me, because that was my office right there, where I got my start, and I first really got on the front lines of both victims' rights and I see so many dear friends here that were incredible friends and mentors to me when I did serve as a prosecutor here. You know, you learn a lot every day when you work every day with law enforcement and you work every day with those that have been the victims of crime. And one of the things you understand very quickly is this notion we have in our society that there's these things that sometimes my friends in the media likes to call they're victimless crimes. And you quickly realize that's not true. And I remember there was a case that this office handled early on when I was just a rookie, and it was a simple breaking and entering of a home during the daytime. Some individuals broke into the home, stole some electronics, some jewelry, and they completely turned upside down a little 8-year-old girl's bedroom, maybe stole her piggy bank. Now, to those in the media, that was a victimless crime, but the reality was, up until this moment, this little 8-year-old girl was a happy, bubbling, excited child. And then everything changed. Every night she'd wake up every 2 hours asking her mommy and daddy to check every single door and every single window in the house to make sure she was safe. Every time they would go out and pull into the driveway of their home, she would refuse to get out of the car because she didn't know if the bad man was inside. It got to the point that this once happy, bubbling, full of life 8-year-old girl had to go into counseling as a child for social anxiety. That always stuck with me. And then obviously you take that to the next level, those that have been the victim of violent crime, and how that can literally turn their entire world upside down. You know, I was talking to a shop owner in Richmond last year who had put his life savings in his retail shop, and he had it destroyed during some of the rioting in Richmond in 2020. And I asked him, I said, how are things going? Are your customers coming back? And he said, it's really, really easy to wash away graffiti. It's incredibly hard to wash away fear. And that always stuck with me. Stuck with me, the people here in the prosecutor's office and the victim witness and law enforcement, you're part of that healing process that allows the victims to wash away that fear. You know, we have a misnomer in our society that if you can read something off a teleprompter or memorize a movie script or have a name on the back of a jersey, well, you're a celebrity and therefore you're a hero and we're going to pay attention to every word you say. But I can tell you, being down in this courthouse, what you quickly realize is how many quiet heroes walk into this building every day. And they come in so many forms. They never get their name in lights, they never get any recognition. My dear friend Colin Stolle mentioned those that work in victim witness. They do so much as far as that healing process. This whole week I've been around the Commonwealth talking to folks, and I was talking to some folks who do victim care through a domestic violence shelter, and I was asking them, what are you seeing out there? And she said, so many of the women that come to us, it's like they're drowning in an ocean, and we're a life preserver. So for those that work in victim care, victim witness, thank you. You're the life preserver on that step. For the officers, you know, I like to say that it's the toughest job in America. When I go to work in the morning, I put on a coat and tie. When they go to work in the morning, they put on a bulletproof vest. It's a job unlike any other. And oftentimes, not enough gratitude is ever shown for the work they do. And one of the hardest parts about this new role that I'm in is attending the funerals of the fallen. I was in Southwest Virginia in Wise County for the funeral of Michael Chandler. He was gunned down in the line of duty. Left behind, he'd only been married a little over a week, left behind a beautiful little girl. And I got to talk to Michael's cousin, who was also in law enforcement. And he talked about the burden of the badge. The burden of the badge. He said it's a job unlike any other because when your shift ends, oftentimes you carry those things that you see and those discussions you have with the victims and the witnesses. You carry that burden with you when you go home. So thank you for being part of that healing process and that life preserver. And perhaps the largest quiet heroes of all are the victims, because they refuse to be silent and in the shadows anymore. When I was in Lynchburg this week, I had a chance to meet Rachel. Rachel was, and domestic violence can happen to anyone, anywhere. She had a master's in health services, and she found herself in a cycle of violence, of successive abusive boyfriends, until a boyfriend that not only was physically abusive, but also not just verbally abusive, but also physically abusive, to the point where she found herself running away in the middle of the night with her 4-year-old daughter And then she had to do one of the most difficult things a human being could do, is to go into court, the victim of a crime, and relive some of the worst moments of their life on a witness stand with their abuser just feet away, and then suffering sometimes the humiliation of a cross-examination. That is courage that most people can't even get their arms around. And so those victims, those true quiet heroes, thank you as well. You know, prior to my service as Attorney General, I served 6 years in the General Assembly, and we're obviously having a huge discussion in our country about criminal justice reform, and that's great. A healthy democracy, you're going to have these big debates. We should have them. But one of the things that frustrated me is when we were debating the issue of criminal justice reform, the one word we rarely ever heard, the one word rarely ever mentioned in committee hearings or in floor debates, was victims. Woe be us as a nation if we forget our victims. And so you can't have criminal justice reform without justice. It's been mentioned about the parole board, which I think was one of the darkest chapters in Virginia's history. The fact you had so many victims and victims' families, people that every holiday, every birthday, every major event, there's an empty chair where their loved one should be sitting and was ripped from them. The fact that they didn't even notify. When I was in Danville this week, Sheriff Mike Taylor of Pittsylvania County relayed a story of a home invasion, parents were murdered, a 9-year-old boy was shot multiple times. He abducted the 13-year-old girl. By a miracle, the 13-year-old girl managed to escape out of the car. And he had to go up to that house because he was notified that the murderer, who was originally given the death penalty, and then it was changed to life without the possibility of parole, and then he got paroled. He had to track down that former 13-year-old girl and knock on her door, told her he was there to talk about that case, and before he could even tell her what had happened, she said, "Please, God, tell me he's not out." That's what we've done in Virginia. Described how that 9-year-old boy that was shot multiple times never recovered because of the bullets that were lodged in him. He had permanent migraines the rest of his life, was never even able to really work. And so their voices and their stories, oftentimes, they're forgotten when we have these big debates in our country about our criminal justice system. And part of why we're here today, and I'm so thankful the media is here today, is to give them that voice. For some of the folks here that are the victims, thank you for that quiet courage you've shown. For those that have been the victim of violent crime but have had to relive it, thank you for your incredible courage and nobility. For those that now have that empty chair at every major holiday and birthday and event, I can't even address the words of your loss. This week I had a chance to meet with a father who lost Demetrius. Demetrius had a 4.0, had dreams of being a doctor, and was murdered and gunned down in cold blood. Demetrius' father shared with me, "My pride and joy was ripped from me. And I feel that burden every day." So on behalf of a grateful Commonwealth for your courage, thank you. May we never forget the men and women that wear the badge, the men and women that do so much for the healing, for the victims, and most importantly, those that are the victims themselves. Thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you, Attorney General Miyares. That brings to a close our ceremony here in recognition of Crime Victims' Rights Week. I would hope that all of you take away from this, and everyone in the community takes away from this, that it's extremely important that we come together to commit ourselves to supporting victims' rights at every level of government, because we cannot move forward, and as our Attorney General said, you cannot receive justice without supporting victims' rights. Thank you all very much for coming here today.